Last year, we got the closest we have ever got to winding back Australia's radical abortion up to birth laws. We actually lost by just one vote. Today, we will look at how events unfolded on that dramatic night, and particularly at the actions of one supposedly pro-life MP who decided to throw the babies under the bus in a split-second decision. And that's today on The Dr. Joe Show. So before we get into today's show, could I please ask you that you subscribe to this channel? The bigger the channel grows, the bigger our movement becomes. Now, this is an episode, guys, I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I've chickened out every time that I've set to do it. And I think that's because I wanted to do it really well. So I put a lot of pressure on myself that when I would talk about this issue on the show, that I would get it right and really explain things, because this is probably one of the most controversial things I've done, and I'm a pretty controversial figure, so that's saying a lot. But the decision I made last year to call out the actions of Dennis Hood, who everyone had thought was a pro-life MP, that decision that I made was highly controversial, and it was criticised from within the pro-life movement and especially obviously by the abortion side as well. So when I set out to film this episode and to write this episode, I did put a lot of pressure on myself because I knew the stakes were high, that I really wanted to get it right, because with the passage of time, and this isn't always the case, sometimes you look back at something that you did or said and you go, I got that wrong. But this is actually one where, as the passage of time has gone on, I have felt more and more convicted that what's on my heart about this particular issue is right. And it's actually the litmus test of whether someone is on our team or not on our team. Now, let me get you back to the start. So the live births bill was something that Ben Hood introduced. Now, this is going to get confusing, guys, because the hero of the story is Ben Hood. The villain is Dennis Hood. They have the same last name, but they are not related. And that was something that was just really confusing to people when all of this happened. But they are totally different guys, but they are in the Liberal Party and they happen to have the same last name. So Ben Hood introduced a bill, and I worked closely with Ben on introducing the live births bill. It was a bill that said that after 28 weeks and up until birth, if a mother wanted to kill her baby, if she wanted an abortion, she couldn't kill the baby, but she could end her pregnancy. So it allowed her to go to hospital, deliver her baby alive. The baby could then be placed for adoption after some time in the NICU because they've been born prematurely. The mother could also change her life, change her mind and decide that she wanted to keep her baby, and that does happen. But what was instrumental about that bill is it stopped the killing of babies, the needless killing of babies after 28 weeks and up until birth. Now, that's third trimester. It's very advanced. You would think that everybody could get behind that, but it was really controversial for the abortion industry, I think, because they knew that they can't brook any criticism of abortion, even at that late gestation, because then it brings the whole thing into disrepute and into question. So it was highly controversial, and on the night of the vote, it lost by one vote. Here's an ABC report that aired on the night of the vote.
Jing Lee, who supported the changes, had agreed to pair with fellow Liberal MP Michelle Lensink, who opposed the legislation. Ms Lensink is on sick leave, receiving treatment for breast cancer. Under that arrangement, Jing Lee would have abstained from voting, meaning the outcome wouldn't have been impacted by Ms Lensink's absence. But just before 10 last night, as the final speeches were underway, Ms Lee pulled out of the deal.
I think it's a new level of political bastardry.
That potentially would have tied the result, with the casting vote falling to Upper House President Terry Stevens, whose support would have carried the bill. Michelle Lensink then turned to One Nation MP Sarah Game as a second pairing option, but after initially believing another deal had been struck, Ms Game decided to vote in favour of the law change.
You cannot put that on somebody else to be the deciding vote in a conscience vote.
By this stage, Michelle Lensink had booked an Uber and was on her way to Parliament with her 8-year-old son to vote in person.
And then I start getting more texts and phone calls from other colleagues saying, no, it's not, no, it's not. In the end, Dennis Hood agreed to pair with me.
I couldn't in good conscience go against the commitment I'd made to her, break that and have her come in here at 10 o'clock at night in the condition she's in.
While this attempt to change SA's abortion laws may have failed, it remains a contentious issue.
So this all hinged on this parliamentary convention of pairing. Pairing is a situation where you've got a party that is the government. So in South Australia, that's the Labor Party, and they've got the numbers, they've got the majority. And in order to make sure that they're able to pass bills even when someone is sick or maybe an MP, their child has a birthday party and they don't want to miss it, what the parliamentary convention is for the government to be able to pass bills, someone from the other side will agree to give them a pair if one of their MPs can't make it into the chamber for the vote. What this means is that the government's able to continue with its business, and it's not going to be dependent upon the vagaries of whether someone can attend or not, because they've got this convention that covers people. So it's basically a contingency to make sure that the government of the day can pass the bills that it wants to pass, because they're the government of the day, because they normally have the majority. But in the case of a private member's bill that has a conscience vote, and that's what this is, Ben Hood decided that he wanted to introduce a bill banning killing the baby in the third trimester. And this was not a party position that either the Liberal Party or the Labor Party had. This was a conscience vote. It was up to each individual member to vote according to their conscience. There is no parliamentary convention to pair on a conscience vote. The reason there's no parliamentary convention in a conscience vote to pair is because it just doesn't make sense. The pairing arrangement is to reflect the will of the people. The people have elected the government of the day, and the reason the parties agree to pair is to make sure that the government's legislative agenda can be advanced and it's not thwarted by the absence of a particular government MP. In the case of a private member's bill, there is no government position, and so the will of the people is not thwarted by the absence of a pairing arrangement. It's just each individual MP acting according to their own conscience. There is no government position, and so there is no need to maintain a majority depending on which side or the other is in power. On the night of the vote, as I was sitting in the chamber, I became aware that Jing Lee had made a decision to pair with Michelle Lenzik, the MP who had cancer, on this vote. Now, I knew that if Jing Lee did this, then we would lose. And so it was that close. We would be one vote short. So in the dinner break, I sought out Jing Lee. I had a conversation with her, and I explained to her that the vote was that close, and that if she did this, the bill wouldn't pass. And I said, I know you're pro-life. You said you support the bill. Then if you support the bill, you have to vote for it. You cannot pair. And so Jing Lee actually thanked me for speaking to her. We took a selfie together, and then she contacted Michelle Lenzik to let her know that she wouldn't be pairing with her anymore on this. Now, then once they got wind of the fact that Jing Lee wasn't pairing, the pro-abortion side went nuts. Russell Wortley, who was the Labor MP, who was the last person to speak on the bill, he started filibustering. He just spoke and spoke and spoke because he was trying to buy the pro-abortion side time. There were pro-abortion Labor MPs coming from the lower house chamber. So people like Katrina Hildyard, Nat Cook, they came down to the upper house and they were standing over people like Reggie Martin and Tung No to make sure that their votes were going to hold. They were trying to convince Tung to pair with Michelle Lenzik. Tung is a very pro-life Labor MP, and he clearly really didn't want to do it. I saw Connie Benares was, quite aggressively coming up to him into his personal space in the actual chamber itself, trying to intimidate him to vote, to pair out. He didn't want to do that. They went up to Sarah Game and they said to her that she had to pair and that it was a parliamentary convention. I then went up to Sarah in the corridor and said, Sarah, there's no parliamentary convention. This is a conscience vote. And the minute she realised that she didn't have to do it, she said, oh, well, I'm not going to do it. The minute she realised how close it was and the fact that her vote would be the reason that the bill didn't pass, she said, well, I can't do that because Sarah is committed to the human rights of these babies in the third trimester, and it even introduced an amendment to make sure that mums who avail themselves of that would get 2 years of counselling under the bill. So, she really supported the bill, so she wasn't going to pair either. So then the vote was called and the bells were rung, and at that point Michelle Lenzik was not in the chamber, so she couldn't vote. There were reports, she said on Twitter, I was in a taxi with my son, but we don't know if that's true because, she's a pro-abortion MP and they lie all the time. So we don't know if she was in the taxi. I know she apparently posted a receipt, but we don't actually know. All we do know is that she wasn't there at the time that the bells were rung and the doors were locked. And so at that point, nobody was willing to pair, but in a surprise last-minute decision, Dennis Hood pairs out and neutralises the power of his vote, and the live births bill lost by 1 vote because of those actions. Now, that was something that I did not see coming, that none of us saw coming, because Dennis Hood had assured me that he was voting for this bill. He's someone that has ridden on the pro-life movement's coattails for years to get pre-selected into that position in the Liberal Party, to get a cushy upper house seat in the Liberal Party. Dennis Hood has relied on pro-life votes of pre-selectors. He's always worn that as a badge, as something that he cared about. And so to see him choosing to pair out with Michelle Lenzik, it was an abject betrayal. And it was a decision that I, to this day, cannot understand. I cannot fathom why he did it. So I was the only person who called out Dennis Hood publicly at that time to say that he did the wrong thing, that he threw the babies under the bus, that he chose to put a parliamentary convention and some deal that he'd made with Michelle Lensick above the needs and interests and human rights and existence of these babies in the third trimester who have no one to speak up for them. And so because of the flack that he was copping, because I think people agreed with me, a lot of ordinary Australians really agreed with me. Liberal pre-selectors were outraged by this. You know, so many of them were writing comments and ringing his office. And, you know, I know that he was copping a lot of flack because he then produced a number of public statements to try and justify what he did, but he also called me. And he called me and he sort of tried to explain what he did, and he begged me to not call him out. And I said to him, Dennis, I understand if this was a split-second decision. You know, if in the heat of the moment, on the night of the debate, you made a call and you got it wrong, you know, because there was just lots of pressure and there was lots going on and it was all happening in a matter of moments. And I said, if that's the case, I really do understand that. But from my perspective, everybody needs to know that you never pair out on a vote on abortion. If you are a pro-life MP, the one power you have is to use the power of your vote to help the babies. And when you pair out, you neutralise the power of your vote and you're not voting for the babies. You're not using your vote for the babies. And I said, I understand if you got that wrong in the moment, and you're willing to come on my channel and we could have a really cordial chat and you could just explain that, yeah, you made the wrong call on the night and you regret it now, but you understand going forward you wouldn't do something like that and you wouldn't advise other people to do it. He didn't want to do that. He didn't acknowledge that he'd done the wrong thing. He was quite prideful about it and actually dug in and said, no, I did the honourable thing. And from my perspective, as someone who has put everything on the line for this issue of ending abortion up to birth and protecting these little babies who have no voice, I just knew, like, I can't put his feelings or his wife's feelings or the rest of the pro-life movement's feelings above the truth. The truth is, when the moment came, Dennis Hood did not use his vote for the babies, and he was digging in his heels and saying that he did the right thing, and that sets a terrifying precedent. You know, if we, the pro-life movement, don't call that out when it happens, then what are we? Who are we? Do we really actually believe that it is human babies that we're protecting? And so let's look at some of those statements that Dennis Hood made at the time to justify what he did. The first justification he gives for why he was right to do what he did is he says that the Honourable Michelle Lensick was on her way to Parliament to vote the bill down anyway. Now, Dennis Hood is not God. He doesn't have a crystal ball. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And so when he uses this ends justifies the means type justification, I just don't buy it. I don't think it's the best or right way to look at it, because the way this works is a bill gets an initial vote at the second reading stage. Now, at that point, the doors were locked, the bell had been rung, Michelle Lensick wasn't there. If Dennis Hood hadn't paired, it's a fact that that bill would have proceeded to the next stage, which is the committee stage. At that point, the bill gets looked at in detail, and that would have been a really useful thing to have happened, that, you know, we would have had to it would have forced the other side to say the arguments as to why they were for killing babies in the third trimester. They would have had to lie on the record to say that this was necessary for women's health. That is a total lie. It's unnecessary. You don't need to kill the baby. You don't need to inject them with potassium chloride. If it had got to committee stage, they would have had to come up with ridiculous arguments based on lies to justify their position. And I would have liked to see them justify their position in that committee stage. Now, what Dennis Hood is saying is that Michelle Lensick would have got there by the third reading stage. So after the committee stage, it would then proceed to the third reading and there would be a vote. And what he's saying is she would have got there by then and the bill would have been voted down anyway. But he doesn't actually know that. I mean, we are all expected to take Michelle Lensick at her word here that she's going to turn up. I don't buy it. I don't necessarily believe her. The pro-abortion side lies all the time. So, you know, when he says, oh, well, I have a crystal ball and it would have gotten voted down anyway, that is not a reason to not use your vote every single time for these babies. And the fact of the matter is the way he used his vote stopped this bill from proceeding. The second argument he gives is that refusing to grant a pair to a member who has cancer and an approved leave of absence from the Parliament would reflect very badly on the pro-life movement, given the unfair and I believe unethical win at any cost approach. This may well reduce support for the movement and thus reduce the likelihood of future positive reform. Now, this is something I heard a fair bit from within the pro-life movement. The dentist hood actually saved us. In fact, I had calls from, pro-life establishment people saying, oh, dentist hood did the honourable thing because, forcing a woman who has cancer to get into a taxi late at night and to turn up to the chamber, that would have looked terrible on the front page of the Advertiser. I'm just going to be honest. I don't care. I don't know Michelle Lenzik. I don't wish her any harm. But if she's so desperate when she's got cancer and been through chemotherapy that she's going to go against the advice of her doctors and get into a cab because that's how much she loves killing babies. She's going to wake up her 8-year-old son in the middle of the night, put him in a cab and go into the Parliament because she loves killing babies in the third trimester that much. Well, put that on the front page of the Advertiser. It's not like the left-wing pro-abortion media ever supports us anyway. We don't go to them and do things on the off chance, on this vain hope that we're somehow going to look good because they're going to throw us a bone. They don't throw us bones. They don't like our agenda. We should not be doing things because of the way it makes us look. We should be doing things because it's the right thing to do. And in this circumstance, when Dennis Hood and pro-life groups justified what he did because they said it was showing compassion for the woman with cancer, what they were essentially doing was choosing to put compassion for the woman with a voice, the woman with a Twitter account who can reach hundreds of thousands of people through her Twitter account, the woman who gets paid over $200,000 a year by the taxpayer. So this powerful, privileged woman who has cancer, yes, they're putting her above the interests of the babies who have no voice, no income, no one to speak for them, whose hearts are getting injected with poison in the dead of the night by an abortionist who is paid to kill them, all in the name of healthcare. All these people who are justifying what Dennis Hood did, they're directing their compassion for the killer because she's going through a hard time and got cancer above the victims. They're giving compassion to Michelle Lenzik, who wants to kill these babies, instead of giving the compassion to the babies who will be killed because of what Dennis Hood did. Because we don't have the data yet, but what I can say without doubt is that because Dennis Hood voted, because he decided to neutralise the power of his vote and to not vote for the babies and to pay Michelle Lenzik, babies will die. We don't know what would have happened and whether this bill would have passed. But because he did what he did, it means that the bill could not proceed. He stopped it in his tracks. If Victoria had passed a bill like this 1 year after they introduced abortion up to birth, 28 babies would have survived. They would be alive today. They would have not been injected with potassium chloride and they would have been induced alive. That's on the Victorian data. Now, we don't have the SA data, but the reality is here was a bill that stopped babies being killed in the third trimester, and because of this misplaced compassion for the killer instead of the victim, babies will die. And that's on Dennis Hood. Dennis Hood then says, well, how would our side, the yes vote, feel if the same tactics were employed against us? That is, if the yes vote had a 1-vote majority, which included a very sick member with cancer, and the no vote reneged on a pairing arrangement at the last minute, and the vote would be lost by that single vote, despite a clear majority of MLCs expressing their support for the bill. If this were to occur, those supporting the bill, including me, would regard this as deplorable behaviour, and yet this is exactly what I was being asked to do. No. The reality is we're on the side of the truth and the right. We're on the side of saving the babies. So Dennis says, how would I have felt? Well, I would have felt very unsurprised because there's no pairing arrangement on a conscience vote. So I wouldn't have been surprised if they chose to renege on a pairing arrangement for this bill. But the other thing is I also would have been unsurprised because they're on the side of killing. This is the thing I think Dennis Hood and the people that are supporting him who are supposedly pro-life don't get. The people that are on Michelle Lenzik's side who voted against this bill are the killers. They're the people that are propagating the killing of these innocent babies in the third trimester. So when they do things to advance more killing, like renege on a deal, then that shouldn't have been made in the first place. I'm not surprised. I just see it as part of the course of what They do. But the fact of the matter is those of us who are on the side of not killing because we care about the victim and we want to protect the victims, we should never, ever pair on something like this. We should never, ever make any decision that supports the killers over the victims. Now, I just don't even know why I'm having to explain this and why it's so confusing, because Dennis Hood's meant to be this pro-life MP, this really virtuous pro-life MP, and yet the one thing that he needed to do, like this was the first time a bill had come up that would have stopped abortion up to birth, and he chose to do this. And the final reason he gives, and this is the reason that is the one that was most prominently given at the time, is he said, I did a deal. He said, I was sick earlier in the year and there was a debate about prostitution. There was a conscience vote on that. And Michelle Lenzik graciously agreed to pair with me then. And so as a result, when she called in a favour and said, you need to pair with me now because I paired with you, he said, I had to do it because I'd done a deal with her. In fact, in his own words, he says, as she had honoured my paired vote in April, I gave her a commitment that if she required a pair arrangement in future due to ill health, that I would provide her with one. I kept my word. And don't you love how he says that? I kept my word, as if he is the honourable one, when in fact, this was the most despicable, dishonourable, abject betrayal. That he chose a dirty political grubby deal that he did with Michelle Lenzik. Like, that's like doing a deal with the devil. This is a woman that belongs in the Greens and the socialist left of the Labor Party. She is pro-abortion. She is pro-prostitution. She is pro-euthanasia. Like, everything evil and bad this woman represents. And he did a deal with her, a deal over his conscience, that he was going to subjugate his conscience to her conscience and vice versa. You don't do that deal. You never do a deal with the devil. You don't. Like that, you don't have an obligation to, and you should never do it. And how stupid is this? He gave her a deal on a bill that the left were going to win anyway. So this vote on prostitution that happened earlier in the year, the left were going to win that one. And he gave a deal on that one when he didn't need to make that deal. His side was going to lose anyway, irrespective of his vote. It didn't come down to one vote. They lost by a few. And he gave her his vote. He neutralised the power of his vote on a bill that was on the most important issue of our time, the lives of innocent babies. There's no greater moral crisis and no bigger cause of death than abortion. He gave her his vote on that. And it was a vote that came down to one vote. That's how clever the Michelle Lenzik side is. They know that when they call in a favour, they call in that favour at the moment that it counts. And that's how dumb our side is, that we make this deal with the devil and we honour it in inverted commas at the very moment that we precisely shouldn't, because the stakes are so high and the vote is so close. But all of this is beside the point. It doesn't matter whether Dennis Hood had a deal that he had to honour. It's just irrelevant, because you don't honour that deal when it's this vote. So, if your neighbour, for example, if you go around to your neighbour's house and you say, make a cake and I've run out of sugar, can I have a cup of sugar? And they give you sugar. They give you a cup of sugar. But then they come around the next day and they say, I want a gun because I need a gun because I want to kill someone. You don't honour that deal. You don't give them the gun. And in this circumstance, when the deal is that you're going to pair with them at some point on a conscience vote, you don't give them your pair on a vote of this magnitude when the lives of babies are at stake. He could have said, sorry, Michelle, I can't give it to you tonight because I care that much about this issue. I'll give you my pair another time. They had some mythical deal about some mythical bill at some point in the future that was on a conscience vote. He should have never made that deal. But absolutely, even more certain than that is when this moment came, he should never have honoured that deal. That's not honourable. And, think about it this way, because there were all of these pro-life people, who sort of stood by Dennis Hood. And I think it's partly because there's a corruption there. They've had these relationships with these MPs who are, turned up to their walks, and they've been to their house for dinner, and they've been on side for many years. They've prayed together. And so there's almost like there's a corruption there, because they've just been in relationship with these people for over a decade. And when it came to the moment and he did the wrong thing, they were unable to call it out, and they actually backed him in and stood by him. And, I don't have those relationships. I've been called into this afresh, and I could see it for what it was, that he did the wrong thing. And, by doing what they did, which is justifying what he did, they were essentially sending a message to other politicians. We might be the pro-life movement, but we don't care if you do this. If you do pair and you stop this bill proceeding, we're going to support you. We're going to back you up. We're going to send press releases. Like Love Adelaide sent 2 emails to their database justifying what Dennis Hood did. Lyall Shelton from Family First, he actually wrote an initial tweet calling out Dennis Hood, but then obviously, the pro-life establishment, Love Adelaide and whatever, got to him, and he wrote, "I have erred in publishing this. I've just been informed Dennis Hood was honouring a pair. This is normal parliamentary convention regardless of the issue. That information was available last night, and his name should never have been subjected to this. I apologise for my earlier post and for being quick to judge." I mean, what a despicable tweet, because what this really exposes is these people just don't see babies in utero the same way they see babies ex utero. These people who are justifying what Dennis Hood did, they're essentially coming, I think, from a place of Christian virtue. So Lyall Shelton says, I was too quick to judge, sort of maybe a reference to taking the splinter out of your own eye before judging another person. But what about do unto others as you would have them do unto you? I mean, if this was Lyall Shelton's own children that were lined up in a room and someone, a so-called doctor, had a syringe filled with poison and they were about to inject that into the heart of Lyall Shelton's own children, and this was a vote about that, we wouldn't even have to ask the question of Lyall Shelton, should Dennis Hood have paired? Lyall Shelton would absolutely say no. Everybody would say no. And for people who claim to be pro-life, what they're essentially claiming is that they see babies in utero as exactly the same as babies ex utero. But what the reaction of the so-called some in the pro-life movement was to this decision by Dennis Hood, it just exposed them. It exposed Love Adelaide, it exposed some members of ACL, it exposed Lyall Shelton as people that would throw the babies under the bus to honour some parliamentary convention that doesn't even exist. But even if it did exist, you don't honour that convention. There are times, and throughout human history, we've seen figures like Thomas More who would rather have their head chopped off than bow down to the authoritarian will of Henry VIII. There are people in history that have said, my conscience means I cannot abide by the law of this land. And so even if there is a parliamentary convention that he should honour, which I don't think there is, and I don't think he should ever have done this deal, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Even if there was, this is the moment that you disobey it, because the lives of children are at stake. And in case you're still confused, and hopefully you're not, one of the easiest ways we can identify that Dennis Hood did the wrong thing is let's look at who celebrated. Let's look at the people that celebrated what Dennis Hood. And you guessed it, it was the pro-abortion industry. It was pro-abortion politicians. It was pro-abortion media who lined up with the so-called establishment pro-life movement to say that he did the right thing. So, for example, Greens co-leader Robert Sims said, Dennis Hood's views on this issue of abortion are well known. In offering a pair to his colleague, Dennis showed great moral leadership and demonstrated that he's a person of high integrity, Mr. Sims said. Now, if Robert Sims, the leader of the Greens, so the most evil political party in the country, if he's saying you're a person of great moral integrity, well, that's got to be a wake-up call. That's a real issue, isn't it? That's a red light, right there that's going off, because, when Robert Sims says that, you've done the wrong thing. And in fact, it's just so hypocritical, because Robert Sims goes on to say the real criticism should be levelled that those who sought to politicise a basic pairing arrangement in this way, these nasty tactics should have no place in SA. Well, this is the same Robert Sims who his own pro-abortion colleague, Tammy Franks, just recently has said there was so much bullying coming from a person in Robert Sims' office that she felt she had to resign from the Greens. So, I love how they go on the moral high ground when it suits them, to justify the killing of babies and to support a politician who supported the killing of babies by pairing. But in reality, it's just so hollow. They don't care about the nastiness. They just care about the fact that Dennis Hood did the thing that got them the outcome they wanted. The South Australian Abortion Action Coalition also jumped in to thank and applaud Dennis Hood. They wrote, Dennis Hood abstained and is to be commended for his action. He was under immense pressure from anti-choice politicians and a certain activist not to provide a pair with Michelle Lenzik, who was absent because of her chemo treatments. So just, this shouldn't be a news to anyone, but if you're on the side of the Abortion Action Coalition, you're clearly on the wrong side. If they come out and congratulate you for what you did the wrong thing. There's no bones about it. This is the coalition that is for killing babies right up until birth, and they actually don't even give a shit about babies who survive their abortion. This coalition is so into killing babies that if a baby survives their abortion, they just don't think they should get an equal right to care under the law. They're opposed to that. They're in favour of killing babies just because they're girls. That's how evil these people are. This is the Abortion Action Coalition, and when they say Dennis Hood abstained is to be commended for this action, that's how you know, without a doubt, he did the wrong thing. So all of this to say, this is now a litmus test for me. When I am looking at working with an MP or a group, I actually say to them, what do you think Dennis Hood should have done? Did he do the right thing? Because he didn't. If you are pro-life, if you are anti-abortion, it's a bit like if you're anti-pedophilia, you just know that abusing children, in the case of pedophilia, or in the case of abortion, killing children is just wrong 100% of the time. There is no justification ever for it. And you don't make a deal, you don't honour a deal, you never do anything that stops you using the power of your vote, which is the one thing that we put you in Parliament to do that helps these babies and these children. So, it was a really intense thing to be part of. I didn't see it coming. I never even dreamed that someone like Dennis Hood, who had ridden the pro-life movement's coattails for so long, would ever do something like that. But when it did happen, and now with the benefit of time, what I can see is that this has actually been a really important moment, a line in the sand, like a wheat from the chaff kind of moment, a moment where, we're pulling out the weeds and we're going, well, we've got abortion up to birth. It's really extreme. Maybe this is why we got it, because we just were not pro-life enough. And that was something that one of the MPs who was on our side, they actually called me and they said, you can't go after Dennis Hood for not being pro-life enough. We'll have no one left. Well, I don't care. Let's have no one left. Like, you either are pro-life and you're against abortion, or you're not. In response to that person who called me, if we have no one left, well, let's start afresh, because we just have to wipe the slate clean. If people are riding the pro-life movement's coattails to get pre-selected and they stand in Parliament off the back of our votes, they shouldn't be there unless they are 100% pro-life, because that's what's at stake. What is at stake is so important that we can only have people who are representing us, who actually represent us. We can't make deals. We can't compromise, because what we're fighting for is so important, and it's for these babies that have no voice. So, we are expecting more. We are uncompromising. There is a new pro-life movement in town. And the best thing is, like, the reach and the following of our movement, the people that vibe with what I'm doing, that's just grown exponentially since this time. Like, at that point, I had 120,000 followers and subscribers on social media and on my database. Now we're well over 200,000. Like, we have been increasing dramatically, not just in following and subscription, but also in reach. 7 million accounts a month we're now reaching, and we're making a huge impact. You can see that in the way we gutted the New South Wales Greens Labor abortion bill. So the reality is, ordinary people vibe with this approach. They appreciate it. Some of the establishment figures don't. But you know what? I say to them, well, get on board or just go away, because there's a new movement in town, and this is the movement. We will fight for the babies no matter the cost, every single time, in every vote, no matter what. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being a part of it. And that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.